Hello, everyone, and welcome to Chapter 6. So, today we are going to be talking about business markets and business buying behavior. And it's important to recognize that in marketing, we have what we call B2C, which is business to consumer, and we also have what we call B2B, which is business to business. And so, today we're going to be talking about the latter, B2B. So the example in the case study is on UPS, United Parcel Service. And UPS has really done an extraordinary job of kind of reimagining themselves. UPS that you know today is not the UPS of yesteryear. First, to begin with, I think UPS is just as much of a household name as FedEx is. And for many years, that was not the case. So initially, UPS just focused on parcels, right? Somebody said that FedEx did letters and UPS did parcels. And so UPS, for a very long time, all they focused on was sending parcel from one location to another. But then they decided to reimagine their interactions with their business consumers. And so what they did, instead of just supplying parcels, they decided to supply what we call logistical solutions. And that meant if you want anything shipped from one part of the globe to another, UPS can do it. And that required a lot of strategic planning, a lot of changes in terms of how they do business. About a year ago, I took some students, some MBA students, to Costa Rica. And while we were in Costa Rica, we went to visit UPS in Costa Rica. So it turns out that UPS has their headquarters for Central America and South America located in Costa Rica. And they, from that location, from that call center, they manage all of UPS locations and business across the region. So they would explain to me that beyond handling packages now, what they do for businesses, in addition to logistics in terms of if you want to get a product from point A to point B, they actually now do the whole shebang. In that, let's say you have a problem with Dell and you need your computer fixed. So you would call in to the customer support um, center, and then you would speak to someone who's actually a UPS person. And that someone would would have been schooled in what kinds of parts need to be replaced. So you would call this if you're a business consumer, right? So let's say you're a business consumer and you want to get part X or you want to get product Y. So you would have passed the diagnosis stage and you know now what part. Then you would call into a UPS call center, but you're actually thinking you're calling into, I don't know, a Dell call center. Then you would tell them what part you need, when you need it by, and they have been contracted by Dell to figure out what part you need, access it from warehouses that they control, and then get it shipped to your location, and then get any faulty part back from the consumer or the business in this case to Dell's warehouse. It's a remarkable change because it means that Dell is no longer managing their warehouses. Dell is no longer managing the shipments. UPS is handling all of that. And so UPS is really taking their skill sets that they learn from delivering packages across the globe and utilizing that on a completely different level. And that is, how they have decided to do their business in these days. And so what that means is that they offer an entire supply chain solution. They are the contact through a call center with your consumer. They figure out how to get the part from the warehouse, which they control, to the end user. They also figure out how to get any part from the end user back to Dell. So I think it's a remarkable kind of reimagining of their services that they have done. Okay, so when we think about the buying behavior of organizations, they typically will buy as a group. They will buy, and there are people within the group that serve certain functions. And those functions can be one person has this role, or it can be a group of people have a particular role. But we are going to talk about when buyers, when a business is making a buying decision, who typically would make that decision, so we understand who we would need to contact within the organization. So just as there was this model of business, of consumer behavior, making purchases and so forth, there's also a characteristic of business markets. Once again, you start off with marketing stimuli and environmental components. Then you go into what we previously would talk about as the black box. But in a B2B context, it's the buying decision process. And then you go on to buyer responses. And your buyer responses kind of speak to product choice, supplier choice, service terms, payment, order quantities, etc., etc. So this is very similar to what we learned in chapter 5, but really we have kind of translated it into a business-to-business context. So when we're thinking of a business-to-business interaction, it's typically going to, a huge part of it is market structure and demand. So business markets are not like your regular consumer markets in that, first to begin with, business markets are much bigger, but there are fewer customers. So what do I mean by that? So when you are selling, if you are Xerox and you are selling copy paper to the B2C market, you have potentially billions of people who would buy your copy paper, and different consumers, right? Certainly hundreds of millions of different people. But when we are talking about Xerox selling paper to markets, business markets, then what they are doing, they're not going to have as large quantities. They are going to have maybe hundreds of thousands, but certainly not billions of businesses that they are selling copy paper to. So, or if you think of it as something like, think of it like, uniforms. Dickies, and Dickie sells uniforms for, let's say, mechanics. So if they were to sell scrubs to individual nurses, they would sell tons and tons of scrubs. But if they are only going to sell, and similarly, if they were selling uniforms to mechanics individually, they would, and people who work, let's say, in a mechanic store or whatever, in a mechanic shop, they want to go out and buy their own uniforms. That is a totally different market that if they were convincing different companies, whether it be Sears Auto or it's going to be Firestone, to buy uniforms from them. The individual consumer, if they had to buy their own uniforms, might buy 5 uniforms that would last them, 6 months to a year. But if they are selling to Sears Auto, they're not going to have a lot of Sears Auto companies or locations buying from them, but the quantities of uniforms will be much larger. And sometimes they can be geographically concentrated. Not all the times, but like if you have a situation in a particular industry, Silicon Valley has a lot of high tech. There are certain places where there are healthcare healthcare hubs like Sacramento. And then the demand is different. The demand is derived, and we say it's derived from consumer markets. And what do I mean by that? Let's think of housing. So housing is a B2C market, right? Individual consumers are buying houses. Companies are not buying houses. However, these housing companies that are building these houses to sell to consumers need to speak to other businesses for the inputs into those houses. So they have a cabinet company that they work with. They have a granite company that they work with. Maybe they have a flooring company that they work with. So they will work with other B2B markets that will need to facilitate the supply of their products. So the demand is derived from that. You also have an inelastic price because a lot of times the demand doesn't go up and down. And so if it is that I run a cafeteria in a hospital, my demand is going to be consistent, even if, it's not like a consumer market. So it's much more steady. Also, the demand, rather the price is not going to fluctuate. The demand may fluctuate, but the price is going to be pretty consistent because they're not going to drop. So like think of like veggies. Veggies, you may have high demand for this vegetable if it's in season. You may have low demand for this vegetable if it's not in season. But no matter what, the hotel is going to pay the same price for veggies. And so, whilst the price, even if the demand moves a little, the price is not going to move, because if the hotel is typically going to say, this is how much I'm willing to pay for bananas, this is how much I'm willing to pay for pork, etc., etc., and they're going to shop around to get the client, to get the market for what they want. Then you also have to think about the fact that the purchasers themselves are different. So when you're thinking of a purchase in a B2B context, it's often from a little buying center, meaning a group of people come together and make a decision. Procurement is typically the place where you will have a group of people making a decision. Sometimes procurement works with the end user, but it's a lot more professional and it's a lot more complex, right? The buying process is formalized. They may not be able to, pay more for something than a certain price. They typically won't pay less than something for a particular price. And sometimes it's amazing what those ranges can be. Those ranges can be quite large or they can be pretty narrow. And that's why you really have to understand buying centers and who is in the buying center. We're going to talk about that in a little bit. So, what are the different types of buys? Well, you have a straight rebuy, which is I am ordering the same thing. So, let's say Jennifer, who works in the dean's office, every month she orders, I don't know, 50 reams of copy paper every single month. That's a straight rebuy. She's not changing it. She doesn't do anything with it. She's just trying the same kind of copy paper, same brand, same quantities. But then sometimes you may have a situation where I am going to